Jacob's life had been filled with challenges and conflicts, many of them brought on by his own actions. From the beginning, Jacob had lived up to his name, which means supplanter, or one who deceives. He tricked his twin brother Esau out of his birthright, Genesis 25:29-34, and deceived his father, Isaac, to receive Esau's blessing, Genesis 27. Now years later, Jacob was a wealthy man with a large family and flocks, but he was about to face a terrifying confrontation with Esau, who he feared might still want revenge. In preparation, Jacob sent his family and possessions across the Jabbok River, remaining alone. That night, he didn't expect anything unusual, but God had other plans. Jacob's heart was heavy, filled with the weight of his decisions, mistakes, and uncertainties. He knew he needed divine help, but didn't fully realize what kind of encounter awaited him. Just as the night deepened, a mysterious figure appeared. The Bible simply refers to this figure as a man, but it quickly becomes clear that Jacob's opponent is no ordinary human. Without warning, the two engage in a wrestling match that lasts all night, and Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day, Genesis 32:24. Why would God choose to wrestle with Jacob? Couldn't he have simply spoken to him as he had before? The answer lies in Jacob's personality. Jacob was a man who struggled and strove for everything he had. He fought with his brother for a birthright, worked tirelessly for his father-in-law, Laban, and now was wrestling with his own insecurities. God met Jacob where he was, engaging him in a way that resonated with his nature. Jacob wasn't just wrestling with a physical being. He was wrestling with his identity, his past mistakes, and his fears about the future. This struggle was as much spiritual and emotional as it was physical. How do you respond when God meets you in unexpected ways, especially during difficult or uncertain times? The wrestling match continued through the night, with neither Jacob nor his opponent willing to yield. This wasn't a mere struggle for victory. It was a test of endurance and determination. As the dawn approached, the man saw that Jacob would not give up. To bring the struggle to an end, he touched Jacob's hip, dislocating it instantly. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Genesis 32:25. This moment is key. God could have overpowered Jacob at any time, yet he allowed the struggle to continue. By touching Jacob's hip, God both demonstrated his power and tested Jacob's willingness to surrender. In this vulnerable moment, Jacob held on tighter. He didn't let go. Instead, he asked for a blessing. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Genesis 32:26. Jacob's request for a blessing wasn't simply a plea for wealth or success. It was a cry for transformation. He knew he could no longer face his life and his future the same way. He wanted a new identity, a new beginning. God answered Jacob's request in a profound way, not with riches or promises, but with a new name. And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed." Genesis 32:27-28. Names in biblical times were deeply significant, often reflecting a person's character or destiny. By changing Jacob's name to Israel, which means he who wrestles with God, or God prevails, God was giving Jacob a new identity, one that acknowledged both his struggles and his relationship with God. This name change signified Jacob's transformation. He was no longer defined by his past deception or striving. He was now a man who had encountered God and emerged changed. By renaming Jacob, God was also establishing a legacy. The nation of Israel would come from this moment, marking Jacob's descendants as a people called to wrestle, believe, and trust in God. As dawn broke, Jacob let go of his opponent, but he was no longer the same. He now walked with a limp, a physical reminder of his encounter with God. His limp wasn't a sign of defeat, but of victory, a mark of transformation and surrender. The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Genesis 32:31. Jacob named the place Peniel, meaning face of God, because he had seen God face to face and yet survived. This encounter marked a turning point in Jacob's life. No longer was he defined by his past mistakes or fears. He was now a man transformed by the power and mercy of God. Jacob's limp would serve as a daily reminder of his encounter with God. It was a visible mark of God's grace and power, symbolizing the strength found in surrender. Jacob's wrestling match with God holds timeless lessons for believers today. Here are a few key takeaways. 1. God meets us in our struggles. God didn't wait for Jacob to be perfect. He met him in the midst of his fears and uncertainties. God's willingness to engage us in our struggles is a reminder of his grace and love. 2. Transformation requires surrender. Jacob didn't receive a blessing until he surrendered fully to God. In the same way, our deepest transformations happen when we let go of our own strength and rely on God. 3. Identity comes from God. Jacob's new name, Israel, reflected his new identity in God. As Christians, our identity is found in Christ, who defines our purpose and worth. 4. Our weakness becomes our strength. Jacob's limp was a reminder of his encounter with God and his dependence on him. Our weaknesses and challenges, when surrendered to God, become our sources of strength and testimony. And 5. God honors perseverance. Jacob's determination to hold on, even in pain, reflects a deep faith. God honors our perseverance when we seek him with all our hearts. Jacob's story reminds us that our struggles with God are not in vain. They are moments of growth, surrender, and divine encounter. In wrestling with God, we find our true selves and receive a new identity rooted in his love and purpose.